I'm here today to talk about the proposed wild horse and burro strategy. And we, BLM, are asking the advisory board to give us specific advice on the segments of the strategy and how we can use your information and advice to move forward. At the same time, we're in the middle of a 30-day public comment period, and the public can go to the blm.gov website, find the strategy, review all of the details, and make comments as well. The most valuable advice that the board may be able to give us is advice that will help the program move forward and define and discuss with Congress as Congress wrestles with budget issues for the whole government. They're wrestling right now. Should we spend more money on wild horses and burros, or should we spend less, and what is this spending for? So your advice will help us, the public's advice will help us, and the most helpful advice would be that coalesces all of the interests that we have so that we are doing the right thing. The Bureau Director announced on February 24th fundamental changes to the program. I'm going to be going through the strategy itself so you can see what those are. I have a short period of time to do it this morning, so we can still take a break, and we will then be able to continue to listen and provide answers to your questions this afternoon if we don't have time this morning.
Thank you.
So, in accordance with the 1971 Wild and Free Roaming Horses and Burro Act, the BLM is required to remove excess wild horses and burros from the range to sustain the health and productivity of the public lands. However, in recent years, adoption demand for these animals has not kept pace with the number removed. As a result, the BLM is currently holding about 41,000 unadopted wild horses in short-term corrals and long-term pastures. The costs to care for these animals are expected to reach about $48 million in fiscal year 2011, an increase of about $20 million over the past 4 years. The BLM understands that the costs to humanely care for so many unadopted wild horses are not sustainable and that changes are needed. So on June 3rd of 2010, the Wild Horse and Burro Program Strategy Development Document was issued for review and comment. A public workshop was held in conjunction with the mid-June Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board meeting last year. BLM received over 9,000 comments on the strategy development document. There were some ideas that BLM substantially modified, like the Secretary's earlier idea that we should use taxpayer money to purchase wild horse preserves in the eastern U.S. Now, our proposed strategy seeks private landowner partners who may want to provide proposals to host excess wild horses in partnership sanctuaries. Another substantial change in our earlier proposal is recognition that the public generally values all herds, and BLM no longer is proposing to only select treasured herds for substantial management attention. The first segment in the Wild Horse and Burro strategy is sustainable herds. The overall goal is to manage wild horses and burros on public lands to support healthy rangeland, and animals are maintained in a thriving natural ecological balance with other uses. Please be aware that while this is our goal, there are many steps on our journey. The first is to reduce the number of horses removed from the range as we consider the implementation steps for the strategy. Where we have been able to remove about 10,000 excess horses each year on our way to AML, for the first couple of years of the strategy, we will limit the removals off the range to 7,600 horses while we await the National Academy of Science information and consider other information we can obtain. We will carefully consider what is the appropriate management level for each herd management area through in-depth analysis of herd and habitat monitoring data and following appropriate NEPA analysis, along with any necessary requirements to modify or amend land use plans with public involvement. There is a strong public support for fertility control, and we will place emphasis on learning more about and applying fertility control. The NAS study will help, our partners will help, and we are implementing a number of fertility control measures as we go forward and learning from them as they are applied. For example, we will implement catch, treat, and release gathers where, say, 1,000 horses are gathered. They are sorted. 400 eligible mares are treated with PZP, Puercine zona pellucida, and then the animals are released. This works best when the herd is already at AML. We are testing under the supposition that this PZP would work for 1 to 2 years, necessitating more frequent gathers. In some herds, where we can gather to achieve appropriate management level, we want to use sex ratio adjustment. Say we want to maintain 100 horses in a herd management area. We gather the 200 horses present and remove a greater proportion of mares and release a greater proportion of stallions. Say 60 stallions to the 40 mares released. Then we can let this HMA rest a little longer between gathers. There may be opportunities to provide for sustainable herds by exploring voluntary agreements with livestock operators to trade use areas or otherwise mitigate the effects to herd management areas from other activities. We want to keep learning better practices for more efficient gather techniques. Where can water trapping be used, for example? We also want to assure we can manage sustainable herds of public rangelands by assessing rangeland health more frequently, by monitoring wild horse and burro habitat when we monitor for other resources, like for water quality and wildlife habitat and livestock use patterns. That is the sustainable herds segment of this strategy. Does the board have any questions right now?
Would the board prefer to ask questions along as we go along each segment, or wait until the 20 minutes that we've allotted for questions? Okay, please go through the entire,
sure,
all the segments, and
you
then
bet.
Come back to questions. Thank you.
So ecotourism is the next segment. So many people call me to complain about what they may have read on someone else's website about BLM killing all the horses, or that claim we are removing all the wild horses, and this is just not true. Once I can get the caller to consider another point of view, I ask if they've had a chance to see the horses on the range. I tell them how I have watched BLM manage horses very well during my time with BLM, which is actually quite a long time. I invite them to visit the herd management areas I manage out in Wyoming or managed previously in California and Oregon. We have great partners out in the West, some that make a living by hosting tours that go see the wild horses on the range. You can go see the Kiger horses with a guide. You can see the McCulloch Peaks horses with a guide. These ecotourism opportunities also assist the local communities by providing jobs and bringing in people to explore other tourism venues. Local communities in the West like tourism, and we like showing people our horse herds so that they can understand the issues better themselves. Are there ways we can encourage more partnerships to tell the story of BLM's wild horses along with us? The next segment are pastures and partnership sanctuaries. We have a goal to provide for sustainable long-term care of excess unadopted wild horse and burros in the most cost-effective manner in long-term pastures or partnership sanctuaries. We will provide additional capacity and keep our long-term pastures that are under contract, but expand our ability to work with partners who really want to share some of this labor of love. I talked yesterday about soliciting and evaluating proposals for partnership sanctuaries. We think, beginning next week, that if you look at grants.gov, starting on or about the 15th of March, you will see this request for applications. Maybe Farm Services Agency can help with private land partnerships. And we want to manage these long-term pastures, whether under contract facilities or partnership sanctuaries, so that the horses can be maintained in non-reproducing herds in pastures large enough to allow free-roaming behavior while providing food, water, and shelter necessary to sustain the horses in good condition. Could the sanctuary partner also provide for education about horses and horse training and increasing adoptions? One neat thing to consider about partnership sanctuaries, as we discussed yesterday, is how partners could also show off these horses as they roam freely in an ecotourism manner where the public can watch. Maybe some of these sanctuaries will be in the east where more of the population can see them. Placing more excess horses into private care is a huge part of our strategy. We need to place more animals into private care. As you know, horses and burros increase on the range at a rate of 20% each year. We are working to see if fertility control and sex ratio adjustment can reduce reproduction, but whatever level the appropriate management level is at, we will continue to produce horses at some rate every year. Can we increase the use of internet adoptions and sales? Can we increase the use of incentives? Can we improve our coordination across the country to bring the horses to the people who are ready for them? We need to offer more trained animals. As you heard yesterday, the opportunities for trained wild horses has been increasing the demand. Let's use our partners, Mustang Heritage Foundation and a number of prison facilities across the West, and other folks like the Mantles from Wyoming. While we work on education, messaging, letting more people know what we have to do, what we have to offer, we will continue to work hard to ensure we only let these wild horses and burros be titled to good homes. We will continue to conduct random post-adoption compliance inspections to address and resolve any instances of non-compliance or inhumane treatment consistent with existing BLM policy. We will continue to screen to make sure that someone that wants to buy BLM horses actually has the land to place them on, land that they own, and is conducive to good management of these horses. The director, Bob Abbey, was very clear to all of us. We have a fundamental change to how we look at ourselves, for how we work with horses and burros. We will continually improve our efforts and not just rely on what we have always known. We will continue to work with veterinarians. We will consider recommendations from others, including the American Horse Protection Association, on findings from the independent observers. We will consider hiring a full-time animal welfare coordinator. Immediately, we will review our practices and look for low-stress animal handling training, similar to what is used by Australian horse managers as they round up horses using helicopters too. We can learn, we can grow, and we can be better. In the proposed strategy, this is titled Continuing Education Program on Animal Care and Handling for Employees, Volunteers, and Contractors. Because we must be responsive to the public and to Congress, who have given us this program to manage. It would be irresponsible to not manage in the most humane way practical. The segment on science and research is critical as we move forward with the proposed strategy. We will use the current best science as we manage the program and pursue increased knowledge of wild horse and burro related science. We will continue existing research on fertility control, conduct and consider new research for ovarectomy in mares, and explore new research for sterilization of both male and females. Given a reasonable expectation of safety, we want to implement promising management techniques as soon as they are practically, economically, and legally feasible. We want to review and evaluate current science applicable to wild horse and burro management. We talked briefly yesterday about the National Academy of Science study, which will review what are the best methods to conduct population census, what are methods for population modeling, what should we expect for annual rates of population growth, and what about the use of immunocontraception, what are AML establishment or adjustment methods, AML being appropriate management level. What about genetic diversity in wild horse and burro herds? What about predator impact on wild horse and burro population growth and the idea of predators controlling populations? And what about other research needs? We've had the advisory board for some time now, and you have been actively engaged for many years. We need to go back and review what you asked for previously in terms of science. Were those studies implemented? What if we were out of funds then, but we have more funds now? Are they still relevant? Do they still need to be pursued? Also, the U.S. Geological Survey is essentially the science arm of the Department of Interior. We want to review and update the cooperative research strategy regarding wild horse and burro research priorities. We need to do a better job of public outreach too. Our goal is to utilize effective communications to build the public's confidence, and we can do that by improving the visibility of our actual program so that the public doesn't have to rely on the websites of others. Can we improve our own website? Can we keep the Wild Horse and Burro program system data current? Can we improve the accuracy and completeness of our reports for gathers, adoptions, sales, and facilities? We want to post these reports on our websites. We want to update the information more. We still need to improve the visibility of gathers and of long-term pastures. I sat with the public at the 15-mile herd gather last year, and we had a nice talk while the horses were moved in. We were in a safe, out of the way of the gather place, and we had a pretty good view. For other gathers that are more likely way out in the open range, we have had reports that some of the public didn't feel that they had a good enough seat. So we will look at our practices and see what we can do to safely, for the people and for the horses, allow viewing to be more open. Our eco-sanctuaries will be built around the concept that the public should be able to see these horses up close. We'll try to put some out east with willing landowners who are willing to apply using grants.gov, starting sometime next week. And we just got to do a better job, and our proposed strategy works on this too. As a wrap-up, I wanted to remind you of the starting point. The BLM's proposed strategy builds on the concepts outlined in the Interior Secretary's October 2009 initiative. This initiative was intended to place the Wild Horse and Burro program on a more sustainable track, enhance the conservation of America's wild horses, and provide better value for the taxpayer. The Secretary's initiative provided a starting point for a conversation with the public about the management of America's wild horses and burros. The BLM continued the public conversation by releasing a Wild Horse and Burro strategy development document last June. With its release, interested stakeholders were invited to offer their opinions and suggestions about the draft goals, objectives, and possible management actions outlined in the document. And even though the strategy is still in its proposed stage and is subject to public comment until March 30, and the advisory board formal recommendations may come today, it's not like we're standing still. We are moving to strengthen partnerships, increase the capacity to adopt horses to good homes, improve our understanding of the science of wild horse and burro management, and continue to gather and remove excess horses from the public lands while improving our humane handling of horses and burros and improving our transparency to the public. The BLM's proposed strategy was developed in response to the input provided by more than 9,000 members of the public who commented on the strategy development document through public meetings, letters, and emails. As an example, there was generally no support for the designation of treasured herds. The BLM has dropped this proposal from the proposed strategy. Another example is that the BLM has dropped the proposal to acquire federally owned long-term wild horse preserves because there was virtually no support for this. Instead, the BLM will solicit proposals for cost-effective wild horse partnership sanctuaries, which public comments generally did support. The proposed strategy assumes appropriations of about $76 million over the next 4 years. This is equivalent to the President's fiscal year 2011 funding request. A temporary reduction in planned removals of excess wild horses and burros would allow the BLM to shift funding to immediate priorities, such as increasing fertility control and boosting adoptions. Accomplishment of the goals outlined in the proposed strategy is dependent on the level of funding received during fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2014. About 62% of the requested funding would be needed to care for unadopted wild horses. Beginning in 2012, the BLM hopes to enter into partnership agreements that would place many of these horses into cost-effective public-private sanctuaries rather than in traditional long-term holding facilities. The next steps are to procure the services of the National Academy of Sciences to review the 3 earlier reports, 1980, 1982, and 91, and make recommendations on how the BLM should proceed based on the latest scientific research. And at the conclusion of the National Academy of Science study, decide whether there is a need for a comprehensive environmental impact statement to analyze the potential impacts of several long-term wild horse and burro management options, or if maybe changes to federal law are needed. If the decision is made to prepare an environmental impact statement, a range of alternatives for future wild horse and burro management would be considered, each representing very different choices and outcomes for America's wild horses and burros, and a broad range of potential social, economic, and environmental impacts. Again, the public is invited to review and provide comments to the BLM on this strategy through March 30th, 2011. Written comments should be submitted by email to wildhorse@blm.gov with comments on strategy in the subject line. The BLM will consider all the comments we receive. These comments may lead to further changes to the BLM's proposed new wild horse and burro management strategy. That completes the slideshow, but I wanted to point out to folks that are looking at the strategy document that there are a couple of interesting pieces of information that deal with the proposed budget. Basically, the summary of the proposed strategy is located on page 14. And you can compare this with a summary of the current management approach on page 15. So if you're interested in how many horses we would remove from the range under the proposed strategy as compared with what we were doing before we had the proposal, you can see the amount of horses that would be removed, the amount of horses that would be in long-term holding, and the amount of money it would cost to reach those places. I think it would be very helpful if the advisory board, as they go through the segments of the strategy, could give us your advice on where we should move, and then we will be able to compile that with the public's comments and move forward into the future.
Okay, thank you for the overview. With the board members, we will be going through this again this afternoon, segment by segment, so we will have additional time for questions and especially discussions. But maybe we can tap into some of the questions that we might have offhand right now. So, questions from the board? Janet.
Carla, on the comments that come in by the end of March that are emailed, what is the plan for categorizing those and determining, what you're going to do with that additional input?
Good question. When we get comments in from the public for the strategy that's gone through a whole lot of work so far, we're really going to be looking for new information that we didn't look at earlier. So if somebody said, yeah, but what about this particular thing? Then I think we're going to have our ears up and looking for those types of things, because we need to find what we didn't hear last time or we didn't know last time. If we get similar comments to what we got earlier, we'll have already considered those in building the proposed comments. So we're really looking for people to say, what about this?
As a follow-up to that, will the comments that come in as of March 30th, will the Bureau have an opportunity to review them before the strategy is put to Congress?
We really want to do that because it doesn't make sense to ask for comments if we're not going to look at them. I don't think that we'll be ready on time for the report to Congress because, unfortunately, it took until when we released the strategy to allow for the 30-day comment period to start. So we're going to take the time we need to make sure that we listen to the comments, look at them, make sure we've covered those or considered those things before we recommend to the director and to the secretary that we go forward with a certain strategy.
And at this time, there is no expectation to extend public comment period?
No.
I also had just a general budget question. We're assuming that we'll be in business, we collectively will be in business 2 weeks from now. What is the impact to the overall strategy if BLM is on a CR for the rest of this fiscal year?
The continuing resolution for fiscal year 2011 brings us down to the funding level we had in 2010, which is some many millions of dollars less than what we had proposed that we needed to begin this work in this fiscal year. So what that means this year is that we would not be able to remove the 7,600 horses proposed from the range, and we're just at under, I think, 5,000 horses now.
Well, aside from
Yeah.
that gather issue,
Yeah.
I'm talking about, do we have the money now under our current or old budget, for the 650 for the first year for the NAS study, for example? Do we have the money, to complete, the internal assessment on the animal welfare?
I think really
UCA
what
is
we're lacking this year, I think we're going to continue with the adoptions. We're going to continue moving forward with seeking training opportunities for low-stress animal handling techniques. So we're going to keep trying to move towards where we think we're going. And I think that the continuing resolution really only affects our ability to move closer to appropriate management level this year. That's the biggest impact.
So it won't affect the Mustang Heritage Foundation funding?
It'll affect it slightly from what our proposal was at the beginning of the year. We'll be able to give them about 75% of what they had proposed at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Other maybe just general questions? Renee?
Does BLM have a fallback strategy, since you just stated that the budget shortfall that we're currently experiencing basically puts us in a position of not being able to do the rest of the gathers for 2011? In addition, yesterday we saw that the PZP treatments, the catch, treat, and release treatments, had been scratched off the list. So automatically on the strategy, we're a year behind.
I think you're right.
And so we had last year's foal crop, just gonna have foals next year. And so we're 2 foal crops behind. How is BLM going to deal with that?
Well-
Because it rolls downhill and gets big really fast.
Right, and I think the biggest thing we're not going to be able to do for the rest of this year under the continuing resolution at last year's funding levels is we won't be able to gather additional horses. We weren't intending to do a lot of PZP treatments in the summer because really you try to do those in the winter time.
Right.
You treat appropriately, I think, November through February. If you treat in the summer, it's really not going to work that well. So we typically have completed our PZP treatments by this time of year.
Well, you still had them crossed off the list yesterday, so something's going to fall by the wayside there. The question stands, does BLM have a fallback strategy? Everything in the strategy that we see on page 16 assumes it all clicks off like clockwork, and that includes 2011 works.
You're right, and
2011
we're
is not
behind,
gonna work.
and we will be behind because of that.
Populations are automatically increased
Yes.
because of that. So all of these numbers change, dynamic on the ground changes. Thriving ecological balance basically goes out the windows pretty quickly.
Well, we hope it doesn't. We're going to keep trying to work on it and keep trying to convince Congress of the need for full funding so that we can get this started.
Are you prepared to up these numbers for gathers to get there so that you maintain thriving ecological balance? Or would you stay here with your 7,600 horses regardless of the number of horses you're over AML on the ground?
One of the reasons that we are reducing the gathers right now is because of the cost to the taxpayer for long-term holding of horses. That we estimated that the long-term holding costs would increase again and again and again if we continue to pull the numbers off the range at 10,000 a year that we had been at. That was our current strategy. We want to work on the issues that the public has raised for us. The public has said, are you sure that your appropriate management level is right? We want to look at that question again. We want to look at what the National Academy of Science gives us in terms of knowing how to do fertility control. And yes, many people are upset that we're not going to be right at AML. I hope that the advisory board can give us some good advice. What is more important? Is it more important to look at the AML gathers, or is it more important to answer some of the other questions that have been legitimately brought up by the public?
I'm just asking if you're prepared to, I'm not saying go up to 10,000 per year as current strategy, but I am asking if you're going to increase that 7,600 per year in your proposal because of the number of horses that we're going to see on the ground because of last year's shortfalls, this year's shortfalls, and get back to the concept. It's not necessarily the public doesn't like AML or they don't like long-term holding. The question gets back to one that Boyd raised yesterday, and that is we are ignoring humane treatment on the ground if we allow the numbers to get over AML and the ground, the surface resource, to become severely impacted.
Everything that we do is dependent on the budget that we got from Congress. I don't know exactly how we're going to adjust the numbers because we couldn't do what we wanted to start with in fiscal year 11 because of the lack of budget. So I don't have the answer to you exactly how we'll shift. I expect we will, but I don't have the answers.
Is BLM prepared that when the public comes back in a couple of years and says, you said you would only collect 7,600 horses per year, and you actually collected 8,500 horses per year, are you prepared to stand up and say, we had to because we had too many horses on the ground?
That's a speculative question. I'm afraid I can't answer that.
It's a reality question. Thank you.
Janet, go, and then Tim.
Hey, Carla, I'm wondering about in last June when the public came and had comment in Denver, there were about 100 people who signed up to volunteer to help the BLM and giving their suggestions and offering their assistance. What has happened to that list, and what are you all doing with it?
I don't know about that list of people, but I do know that the BLM is actively involved in discussions with our field offices with what we can do with volunteers. Because when I'm not here sitting in this Washington office chair, I'm in the field as a field manager, and the biggest thing that I consider when volunteers want to work for me is, do I have a specific job for them to do, and do I have a specific supervisor? So I would imagine, I know that we're looking at asking the field offices to come forward with opportunities. In McCullough Peaks, Wyoming, and some of the other herds in Pryor Mountains, Montana, there are actively engaged volunteers. We want to encourage those to the extent that we have work for them to do and that we can understand and work with them so that they can do their work under appropriate supervision.
Carla, if I'm, is this on? Carla, if I might add the approximate 100 names that came in on the cards. I think that's what you asked about. What happened to those? Those were distributed to the field for them to consider contacting those people, and with the emphasis on volunteerism that Director Abby has mentioned, that's what we're seeking, partners and volunteers.
Is there any coordination of that from the Washington office?
We haven't followed up on how they've engaged those volunteers yet.
Okay.
But the cards were distributed.
Tim, you had a question?
Yes, I guess, you know, with the budget difference, I think, you know, the tendency is to apply, you got a shortfall, to apply that kind of generically across the board. If there's a 25% shortfall, you take 25% off everybody. I guess I would question the logic of cutting the funds to like the Mustang Heritage Foundation, because that is really working well. And I would hope that the BLM would look at perhaps getting a little money from somewhere else and funding them fully, because they are really working. And you know, my philosophy is when something's working and you got a positive flow, is really putting the efforts there. And they've just seem to be doing such a good job. It would just seem kind of silly to me to cut their funding at all. If anything, I'd do whatever I could to try to support them.
I think if you made a formal recommendation, that would be something that BLM would really
Yeah,
consider.
That makes sense to me.
As a follow-up to what Renee was asking, maybe, and this might be a potential recommendation down the line, is recommending that BLM have a contingency plan should they not get the, you know, beyond the CR. More, and maybe it's as specific as, you know, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or, well, 6 months is the end of the fiscal year. So 3 months and at least 3 months. And that might be something that the board might want to entertain later this afternoon, because we understand and acknowledge that you're in a state of limbo with regard to dollars. However, we still need to be prepared should you not receive the dollars. And some of the questions like Renee was asking and all of us have commented on, they're still very important. And we need to have a game plan, even if we're down to plan C and D.
You're
Plan
absolutely
A
right, yeah.
is contingent on funding. So if we don't get the funding, then we need to have something, and we don't have time to, you know, do it after the day after that, you know, we would say, oh, well, you're not on another CR for the next 2 weeks or the next 3
You're
weeks.
absolutely right, and I think in the future we'll do that. It's been interesting in the last many years. Congress has sometimes taken till December or January to give us a budget. So many years we actually get a budget at some point, but we didn't this time. Not yet.
Are there other questions at this point?
One more.
Renee?
Again, in June, you've got a lot of comments from the wildlife groups, WAFWA, Arizona, Oregon, New Mexico, Wyoming. The strategy analysis in front of us says that you heard. Those guys pointed out very strongly that their resources, they're required to manage their big game, that the resources that support those creatures are impacted by over AML horse herd areas. And that since they are required to control ungulates, the livestock guys are required to control their grazers. BLM needs a firm commitment that they're going to control their grazers. There's an awful lot in here about things you're going to do because the horse advocacy groups are concerned about this, that, or the other thing. We don't see anything in here that talks about contingencies and fallbacks relative to areas that go over AML, where the resource is damaged, and where we have to work more closely with wildlife agencies to make sure that we remove horses so that we maintain forage resources on the ground.
I know that the long-term objective of this strategy is to get back to the point in 2015 and beyond where we're back down to AML, and with the additional tools or technologies that we may find from either science or fertility control research that we're currently under, that we'll be able to get back to AML when it has been reaffirmed or redone in every herd management area. And we'll keep the horses, dependent on congressional funding, at that AML level in a thriving ecological balance. That is really important to us, particularly those of us on the ground that have to manage. Now, that said, we do have a divergence of opinions in society. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all say, we all understand the needs of each other, and here's the recommendation to go forward, and it should be to keep the horses in a thriving ecological balance with the range, and it should be to improve our humane techniques, and it should be to improve adoptions. I agree with you.
How will BLM reconcile issues between greater sage-grouse conservation and increased horses on the range and any sort of range degradation, habitat degradation?
That's an interesting question, and recently our staff in Washington was collecting information to report to the Fish and Wildlife Service about the increase in horse numbers or the decrease in horse numbers in certain herd management areas that also overlap sage-grouse habitat. I don't know exactly how we're answering that in a large context, but I know individually we do look at that, we do consider that, and if new information comes down to us, we will be responsive to that.
Would BLM be willing to increase gathers if they begin visibly affecting sage-grouse habitat?
Depending on available funding, yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask regarding the National Academy of Science study, what's the thought process behind BLM's decision that they have to, that 2-year study needs to be completed before they even get to the point of whether they're going to decide whether an EIS is
Well,
necessary?
that's an interesting question, because it's not like we've stopped and we're waiting till the end of the NAS study. We're moving forward on a lot of pieces of the strategy, and we're moving forward on what we know about fertility control and continue to do that. But if the National Academy of Science study and research, for example, gives us information on maybe some population modeling and gives us some better information on what we can expect out there and maybe different ways to manage public lands, we would then consider those things in a collective programmatic EIS.
So BLM at this point does not feel like they have enough information with regard to all that the advisory board has done in the last 12, 14 years in terms of, you know, getting some of the new censusing methodology off the ground and some of the habitat stuff and some of the research that we've done. I'm looking at, you know, another 2 years, and I'm not speaking against an NAS study necessarily. I'm just wondering what the thought process is, because 2 years from now, let's say the NAS study says that you should proceed with an EIS. Well, we all know how long an EIS takes.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're living now.
Yeah, and I think it depends more on what is the proposed action or the proposed change that would cause you to do a programmatic environmental impact statement. Because right now, what would we do an EIS on? We don't know. We don't have all the data that would help us say, here's what population modeling might say, here's our new information on this type of habitat and how productive it is out in this part of the desert west. So when we have collected that additional science, and I agree, we all agree it's additional science, then we might have an idea that we want to do something specific. That proposed action generates the EIS. Right now, we don't know that we're going to do something specifically different.
Do you recall, and maybe Dean knows this, for the 80, 82, and 91 studies, did they result in an EIS? Or did they call for one? I don't think so.
No, there's been no national EIS for the Wild Horse and Burro program.
Okay, thank you. Are there any, yeah, Wayne, and then Gary?
Carla, in looking at this, I see nothing in here that suggests to me that you've analyzed the bigger picture issue that is confounding the horse program, i.e., did you analyze what is the national societal capacity to absorb excess horse production off the public lands, and then balance, set a strategy to balance the herd numbers on the land, one, in terms of the capacity of the land, but more importantly, in terms of society's ability to absorb the excess. I see nothing that indicates you even considered that.
I know that that's where we want to be able to go, so that with fertility control, appropriate management levels, we balance the reproduction that we take off the range every 3 years or so with the adoption capacity. That is exactly where we want to go. We don't know how exactly to do that yet. We don't know the exact appropriate management level on the range because of the questions that have been raised. That's exactly where we want to get to.
It should be upfront that that's the basis of the strategy, to put in balance in terms of society's ability to absorb and in terms of the land's capacity to support.
That's a good point.
It bothers me a lot that I don't see that analysis.
Okay.
Gary, you had a question?
I did, and I asked this question last night, and I got two different answers. So I'm gonna ask you, yeah, it was said yesterday that we can't enter in any new contracts, either for sanctuaries or holding facilities for horses. But yet here we're gonna spend $1.5 million on a new contract with NSC, or what it, the National
okay.
Academy of Science. There seems to be a conflict of dollars there to me.
And I think I may have misspoke or not had all the information yesterday. What we have already an opportunity to work with NAS and available funding. What we can't do with continuing resolutions is enter into new obligations of funding above the level that we had the previous year. So we had so the continuing resolution says you have fiscal year 2010 budget levels. We had hoped to do something in 2011 that was up here. We knew we were going to do the NAS study, so we planned for that early. So under any situation, we have that available. But what we can't do is enter into contracts like for construction or things that would commit the government to a higher level of funding than we're getting.